All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Unconditional Love web series, in which we are covering the ritual of death and dying today. We are excited that you have joined us for this session, and we're excited to have this conversation with you. So we are your hosts, Stephanie Bowman, Nicole Andrews, and Julie Brock. We will just take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I would welcome, Stephanie and Nicole, for you to introduce yourself and tell us one ritual around death that you have used. So I'll go ahead and go first. My name is Julie Brock. I use she, her pronouns. For those who are maybe watching or listening, I am a white het cis woman presenting with long grayish hair, glasses, and a black top on today. And one ritual that I use around death is, especially when I think about death to self and like the burning out of things that no longer serve me, as I literally burn. So I will use the ritual of vow breaking, where I write down vows that no longer serve me and I burn them, and then I replace them with vows that will serve me better in the future. Nicole?
I am Nicole Andrews. Hello, everyone. I use the pronoun she, her. I am a Black cishet woman, and today I am wearing a pink top with black polka dots, and I have reddish, orangish, curly hair with like a short cut. And one of the rituals I use around death, I think people don't often think of as a ritual for death, but in my faith, we have communion, and in remembrance we take wafer crackers and drink wine or drink juice as a offering of remembrance, and so that is a ritual that I practice monthly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Bowman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a brown presenting femme woman. I'm wearing glasses and I have a blue dress on. One of the ways in one of the rituals that I have around death is I do celebrate Dia de los Muertos, which comes around late October, early November. And there's 9 days associated with it, and there's a lot of different rituals within that. It's really a way of welcoming our loved ones, those that have passed, and our ancestors formally back into the space and connecting with joy, food, and celebration.
Thank you so much for that. We welcome both those who are watching in the replay and those who are with us today to journal, to take notes, to think about what are some rituals around death that you also have. And we'll have some questions all the way through the webinar for you to reflect upon. Nicole and then Stephanie.
Yeah, we just want to thank you and welcome you as we start to look into this series on unconditional love. We want to talk about what does that mean? What does that look like for each of us? And what does that look like for Grafted Roots? And so we just thank you to take this moment and think about what unconditional love means for you, as Stephanie lets us know what it means for our team.
Yes, yeah, so excited. Welcome into this space. So when we talk about unconditional love, we're not talking about it as a performative aspect, nor in a romantic sense. We believe that unconditional love is a practice of being rooted in, so embodying equity, which means every being has inherent worth, reciprocity, which is we give and we receive, and humanity, honoring that shared divinity and dignity in between, in each of us, right? It's not a feeling of unconditional love. It's a way of being that we can coexist with, that we can still coexist even though we are living in these systems of oppression and domination, right? Once again, just really not focusing on that, like, oh, we can just love things away. No, but we can love ourselves through it. And that's really what we're hoping to do. Unconditional love, lastly, is a deep knowing, inner connection, and trust in your intuition. So, to set the space, I want us to take a moment as we navigate these conversations. Um, if you want to participate, I'd love to have you. If you don't, that's okay. But if something that a good friend named Amanda Goodenough once told me was challenge by choice. And so we have challenges set in this workshop, but it is your choice to participate in them. So you have autonomy. So we're going to start by closing our eyes. Take a moment to focus on your breath. Feel your lungs filling in with air. Feel how the breath comes out of your nose or out of your mouth as you exhale. Next, I want you to focus on your body. Where are you holding your tension? I want you to release that. Shake it off. Maybe shrug. Do whatever you need. If you have tension in multiple parts of your body, go ahead and do that wherever you're feeling. If you've got your legs crossed, uncross them, stretch them out. Next, I want you to focus on your mind. Let all of those racing thoughts come to the forefront of your brain and then let them out. Open that door so that they can escape. Clear your thoughts. This is what we call arriving in our body. As we have this conversation of death and dying, I want us to remember that there is nothing to fear, right? In having these conversations, we're not conjuring spirits. We're just remembering souls. If you don't want to participate in this next step, please take this moment to call in the energy you need as we learn about grief, death, and dying. If you want to participate, then I would say first we're going to light our candles, and we're going to light it with the intention to hold love. So as you're lighting it, say, I light this candle with the intention of love. Just to surround us in a space of that unconditional love that we were talking about at the beginning. Next, if you have a memory object of someone who you have lost and would like to remember, you can hold it at this time. If you don't, that's okay. I want you to just say that name out loud. That person you want to remember, that person who taught you to love, that person who held you in unconditional divinity. Say their name out loud. We're going to take a minute and we're going to sit with our thoughts and our memories of those who you have called into this space. Honor the bodies who held us, the ancestors who dreamt of us, and the cycle that reminds us that we are never alone.
Thank you, Stephanie, for leading us through that and to get us ready as we start this process. We're going to start talking about grief as a form of alchemy. Alchemy is the transfiguration of our inner knowledge and glory and ancestral experience into the outward representation of action. So when we feel grief deeply, but then we transfer that and we transfigure it into this space of representation, whether that's through our tears, through how it shows up in our body, how it shows up in our expression of love for others. So one way that we look at grief as alchemy is we also can look at grief as a metabolism. Grief can be expressed through the body, just like the human body metabolizes food. It absorbs it and then it uses it. The same can be said with grief. It is expressed through tears that are released. Fatigue is expressed as protection when it tells us we need to rest, when we need to take time for ourselves. Anger becomes a boundary, and we can use it to protect ourselves from others, to say we need a moment, to surround ourselves and just turn inward. And then sometimes it's expressed as numbness, which is for survival. Just like the body can have low or high metabolism, grief can also follow in similar cycles. It's often depending on what we lost or what was absorbed in the process of that loss.
Grief can also alchemize through the phoenix. So when we think about the phoenix, it's a powerful metaphor for grief, and in particular, getting to acceptance. So when we think about the grief cycle that takes us through that denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, grief as phoenix starts to pull us toward acceptance. So if we think about a phoenix takes on life at a very fast rate, right? And it's growing and it's aging well past our construct of time. And then that weight of life becomes too much and it combusts. And when it combusts, it's death by fire, right? It burns up the old in order to make room for the new. And that new is fresh. But it's also wise. So it still holds the wisdom of all of that life that it loved, that it had and that it lived, but the weight of that life is no longer there. So when we think about grief as that phoenix, that cycle is taking us through death to an aspect of ourselves, or through the death of someone close to us, or a collective understanding of death. And when we are able to alchemize that through fire, through the phoenix, we are then able to come through to acceptance, where we are lighter, we're fresher, but we hold the wisdom that came from that grief and from understanding and being in relationship with the aspect of ourselves that has died, or that loved one that has died.
We also see grief as an integration, right? An integration of our body, mind, and our spirit. So, the question that I want us to think through is, how do we integrate grief into our human experience? I think right now, numbness is taking a hold of a lot of us because we're experiencing multiple griefs over and over. Um, but if we don't process it, right, through that metabolism that Nicole was talking about, through that transformation of a phoenix that Julie taught us, it gets stuck in our bodies. And when grief gets stuck, either in your body, in your mind, or in your spirit, then we're not well. We're unwell because we're not able to move through that. So we integrate grief into our mind by learning, right? Reading books, understanding the process of death. I think it's really important for us to start there. And especially like if you have folks who are in your care or folks you are teaching, to really teach through that process of what does death look like? What is it? What is the physical aspects of it, so that it becomes less taboo and it becomes more normalized. Um, Connecting with a mental health practitioner or anyone in your group of sphere, who can help you through the mental load of grief so you can talk through it, right? You can tease out your questions, your concerns. It's really important to be able to process grief in your mind. Next, we want you to be able to integrate that grief in your body. What does grief feel like? Remember the tension we kind of talked about at the beginning? Are you holding it? Do you get tense, shaky, hot flashes, cold palms, sweaty? Feel like I'm about to like put some M&M here. That's not what I'm talking about. But we need to acknowledge it. We need to name it. We need to understand it in order to figure out what do we do with this, right? In order to begin to figure out what type of activity do I need to engage in order to release this from my body? Does that include hiking? Does that include dance? Does that include somatic movements? But what do we have to do so that we can integrate it and move it through the body? Then we work as in the spiritual, in your spirit sense, right? So that whether this could be a cultural perspective or a religious perspectives, what is your community's thoughts on griefs? How are morals and values tied to this grief? How is that connected to death and dying? It's important to understand what your spiritual connection is to death and dying to figure out how to metabolize it. Um, to answer the questions, what do I do? How am I in community? What does our community do to process this? How do I mourn with others so I'm not mourning alone? How do I talk to people who have similar experiences? There's so much in that spiritual aspect that is a direct correlation to community involvement, because the spirit needs that. Spirit needs other folks to do that. And then as you're kind of mapping that out, really asking yourself, what roles does energy, emotion, and experiences play into grief? So that's like the shaded spots in that diagram are your energy. So what type of energy am I putting when I, connect my mind and body? Or what type of emotions um, are either helping that integration or blocking that integration? What type of experiences have I had between my body and my spirit that make grief tangible or impractical, right? That you like told yourself. So it's just more so questions for you all to go through on your own as you're exploring how do I alchemize grief.
And one way to really think about that alchemization is that through this concept that the dead aren't dead. So much like that phoenix contains the wisdom of its experience without the weight, we too have access to our ancestors who have gone before us through memory, through story, through even the idea of holding something, tangible that comes from the people who have come and gone before us. And so when we start to think about our ancestors through memory and spiritual uh con- like connectedness and I can't say the word continuation. I'm just going to change it. Um, I think about a time. So when my grandmother passed, she was the last of my grandparents to pass. And I remember being at the funeral and watching my mom and her six siblings come to that realization that they were now the elders. And there was a there was a grief that came from losing their mother as well as this grief around recognizing that they were now the elders. And in that moment, then became there were so many questions that came up for them around what are our responsibilities, what values will we continue forward, um, how will we continue and maintain like the wisdom and the ethics that come with this family lineage. So when we think about our ancestors in memory and thinking about how the dead are not dead, it's partly because we are connected and we are the continuation of that line. And we then thinking forward that we are our future elders, we are our future ancestors. How then, if we accept that we are the living legacy, what will ours hold? What will our legacy hold? And these are ideas for you to start to think through about what will I carry forward and what will I not.
Yes. Right. So love does not die. Speaking with the dead is not morbid. It's a practice of continuity, remembrance, and relational healing. What I'm talking about specifically here is connecting with our ancestors. Indigenous people use prayer, song, offerings to ask, as they connect to their ancestors, right? To ask for continued guidance and teaching because Indigenous folks across the world believe that we still have much to learn here in the land of the living, that our ancestors' role is to guide us, is to teach us through maybe things that they weren't able to do while they were still alive. So there's that reciprocity that we talked about at the beginning. Africans and African diasporic people use offerings and spirituality to sustain lineage, to protect the living, right? Through prayer, to embody memory. And so when folks connect with their ancestors, it's really coming from a different perspective than what some indigenous folks do. East Asian people use incense, offerings, and light, such as candles, to honor their ancestors, to ensure harmony, continuity, and balance. I want us to remember that those who have passed still have the ability to teach us about life and living. There are many different folks who have done this on many different social media platforms. But a couple of weeks ago, I saw, I can't remember where. Like my memory is terrible. But it was called a grief phone. So they set up like a rotary phone on like this desk, and it was kind of covered, but not fully. And you were able to walk up to it to dial the number of your loved one who passed, and then have a conversation over the phone with them. And the line for that phone was so long, right? And so there's so many people, communities, and cultures who engage in communicating with those who have passed. Um, and that we want to just like encourage that. Like, how do we still connect with our ancestors to receive the love and guidance that they have to share?
As Stephanie said, love does not die when we move on. And Julie asked us the question of what is our legacy? And we can have this legacy of love. When we think about what happens when we're gone and what do we want to leave behind, by focusing on legacy, we're building a bridge of unconditional love over time and over distance. Unconditional love is the legacy that never ends. It's the way people remember you when they think of you and when they speak of you in rooms where you're not in. Sometimes it's a living legacy. It may just be over distance versus they've been gone and not on this mortal plane. In my youth, I used to hear this Bible verse that was said often at funerals. And for folks who grew up in the Black church, we typically use a lot of the same phrases. We use a lot of the same verses that are just repeated time and time again. And a very common phrase that I heard often was the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And for me, that translated into no matter if the person is gone, the prayers that they left for you, the things that they said about you still exist. They still are reaching the heavens, they are still covering you. So when I was launched into the world and I left for college and I was far away from my family, I really felt like nothing could touch me because I had this saying in my back pocket and I would use it all the time. I would say, "Oh, I have a praying grandmother." Whether she was here or not, whether my great grandmother had passed, while other parts of my family were gone, as my elders had moved on, it was the unconditional love that I wore as a veil of protection. I felt it every day. And when I think about grief and I think about how they alchemized their legacy and their love for me into protection, we can also think about how it's turned into this veil for all of us and how we can use love as part of that process.
So we move on to the next part. The dying aren't dead. What does it mean to live through mortality? Right? Mortality as a mandate to live. Mortality is not a punishment, it's a permission slip. To know we're going to die is to be called into living with intention. Mortality asks us to stop postponing our joy, to stop waiting for certainty, to stop believing that love is something we earn over time. It reminds us that the only real currency we have is presence. Death's inevitability is not meant to frighten us, but to free us, to remind us that meaning is made in motion, not in perfection. It's made in living. In life, we are infinite. If it were infinite, we'd forget to notice the miracle of breath, the miracle of touch, of sunrise, of grief. I got to spend Tuesday with my youngest. So he'll be 3 here in January. And he wanted to sit in every chair. There's a lot of chairs at the store. He's like, "Oh, sit here. You sit there." And he's like, "This is big. This is small." We spent 30 minutes just sitting in chairs. And at first, I was like, "This is what are we doing?" So we're not gonna buy a chair. So what are we sitting down here for? But it really reminded me in that life is precious and moments are precious. And it's what we put into them, right? The intention we put into them that makes meaning. And so while I could look at that as a moment in which we were wasting time, I choose to look at it as like we were just exploring different seating and what does it feel to sit on a wood chair versus a couch versus a rocking chair versus a stool. And it's in those small moments in which you get to live. To be mortal is to be invited again and again to practice that aliveness before it's too late. Mortality states that we love wildly, that we forgive, and that we create boldly because the end is not the opposite of life. It's the reason why we must live it fully.
So, one of the things, or one of the ways in which we are invited to accept our mortality is also to then accept the fact that while here, we can have purpose. While here, we can contribute. So oftentimes we hear from folks who are reaching their 70s and 80s is their regrets. I wish I would have, right? And they start to wish for those choices they that they didn't choose. They start to wish for spending more time with their children, spending more time adventuring. I wish I would have taken the risk, taken the jump, taken the flight, said yes, right? So we have to decide in our life, if our life is legacy, when will we decide that our worth is here because of the air we breathe? And once we accept those two things, my life is legacy and I am worth the air I breathe, then then we have the motivation to listen to an intuition and follow that call. So presence and purpose are hand in hand. Are we present in the moment? Are we able to sit in all the different chairs like a 3-year-old and compare? Oh, on this one, my feet don't touch the ground. On this one, they do. Um, are we able to accept that it's never too late? If we're taking breath, we can change. All of the brain science tells us that. We can always lay down new brain pathways every single day. Is it easy? No. Is it worth it? Maybe. Why not try? Right? Purpose gives us meaning, and meaning gives us will, and it matters. And when we have the will to live fully, then we also have the motivation to find our purpose within.
So, as we start preparing for death, as we are still part of the dying, we tend to do this in really traditional ways, right? We begin to believe certain actions need to take place, and we have to exist in a certain way. So, as we move through our life, we're thinking about how do I prepare for my eventual demise. Certain life experiences can make that preparation necessary as we're getting older, when we're bringing new life into our families, or when we're facing an illness. Suddenly, we are hit with that mortality straight into our face. We're forced to think about it. And so we start to behave in two different ways. We look at mortality in a really like carnal way. And we say, oh, I need to have a living will, or I need to have a trust, or I need to think about what's going to happen to my material items once I'm gone? How do I prepare for my death, but in a way that allows the living to have access, in a way that allows my legacy to be tangible to others? And the other way that we think about death when we're talking about how am I preparing for it is in a very spiritual way. Some of us have had this view of like, oh, I'm living to just get to heaven. Like I am living the way that I live my life, or to whatever our next step is, whether that's reincarnating into something different or into the same form, as if it's in other spiritual mandates that we have that tell us once we have finished with this mortal life, it is incumbent upon us to look back over that and the being weighed out as to did I live a good life so that the afterlife is a reflection of that. And so as we're preparing for death, we start to prepare in these two very like tangible ways, the carnal way and then the spiritual way of I am preparing for what my life will look like post living.
Yeah. We also want to talk about collective and embodied grief. So, what is the weight of collective grief? What we're talking about here is community grief, whether that be, um, I mean, what not collective grief at this moment? Watching masked men kidnap mothers fathers, children, people, um, watching Black bodies be disposed of through this, once again, this law and whatnot, knowing that trans folks are also being murdered at a significantly alarming rate. We have so much collective grief. And there's weight to that, right? Because that grief doesn't happen in isolation. It happens inside systems already heavy with collective loss. Generations of displacement, oppression, pandemics, the climate collapse, those all live in our bodies as inherited exhaustion. We are all carrying way too much. When personal grief enters the field of collective pain, it doesn't have that space to breathe. It just compounds, it thickens, it overwhelms. We live in cultures that expect grief to be performed, display sorrow a certain way. There's a timeline for moving on, but grief doesn't have an etiquette. It doesn't have an expiration date. It, the demand to be functional too soon turns grief into another form of labor. We are asked to mourn efficiently, to cry quietly, to return to work as though our love isn't still bleeding through us. So, what does this look like in our nervous system? Our nervous system is also in mourning. When we lose someone or something, our nervous system enters its state of survival. It's trying to metabolize that absence while the world keeps demanding presence. This is a nearly impossible task. In the body, grief looks like confusion, fatigue, anxiety, or even numbness. It's the body's way of saying, I can't keep performing aliveness while something inside of me has died. But our cultural systems rarely make space for that truth. Mental health frameworks often treat grief as a condition to be managed rather than a transformation to be honored. Capitalist and colonial systems have conditioned us to bounce back, to prove resiliency, to keep producing, to stay composed. Yet, the real healing asks for collapse. It asks for rest, for stillness, to be unproductive. The nervous system needs gentleness, ritual, and community care to regulate. And so we must create a new rhythm for grieving. If grief is communal, then healing must be as well. What if instead of asking when grief should end, we asked how can we hold one another while it changes shape? What if we saw grief not as a problem to fix, but as a sacred companion that reminds us of our capacity to love? When we grieve together, without performance, without deadline, we interrupt the systems that demand we are vulnerable. We reclaim our humanity.
So, as we talked about individual grief and we talked about collective grief, the manifestation of that also can include release and relief. And so we're going to do a practice now, if you choose to, because as we said, this is learning by choice, where we are going to focus on what are some ways in which we can bring forth that release and that relief. So I ask you as we engage in this guided visual activity and meditation to just take a moment, if possible, to practice this with us as we see grief as a river. So I ask you to close your eyes, take a deep breath in, let that breath out. Now you're going to imagine grief as a river. Where are you standing? Are you in the water? Are you on the bank? Or are you far away? What is the direction that the water is moving? Is it going towards you or is it pulling away from you? As you look at the river, how wide is it? How deep? If you're standing in it, is it coming up to your knees? Is it up to your thighs? Is it covering you? If you're outside of it, can you look down and see the bottom? Is it shallow? And what does this river of grief hold? Do you see notes, words, messages, people, faces, their names, the sound of your loved ones? What does it sound like? Listen closely. What is it telling you? As you're in this space, I want you to recall a memory of grief that has been hard to carry. Imagine you are writing it down on a piece of paper. And then when you're ready, release that memory into the river. And that water will carry that message where it needs to go. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and return to this space. What that practice helps us do is remember that death continues. And we want to offer you an invitation to have an ongoing ritual or practice or process for engaging with your grief, with life after, with those who you have memory of once they have gone, and to create a practice or a ritual for yourself that allows you to feel connected with them. Whether that's creating a weekly memory offering or monthly offering or an annual offering on an anniversary, acknowledging that grief's anniversary. And again, this doesn't just have to be with people. Those of us who have lost opportunities, we have had to say goodbye to places, we have had to say goodbye to relationships. It may be time to acknowledge the grief of those anniversaries as well. And then lastly, another option is to speak their names and keep the love in circulation, to continue to allow that legacy of love to flow and that relationship to continue past the physical connection that would exist.
So we thank you again for checking out this web series. We have more to come. In our next web series of Unconditional Love, we'll be talking about white supremacy. So you'll find our rhythm. We look at a human condition that we all share, and then we'll also look at systemic systems that are human made that also keep us from unconditional love. Um, we ask you to join us over at Grafted Roots. We have all sorts of different teachings, community opportunities for you to connect with like-minded folks. We also have co-power courses. So we will have a co-power course available that covers death and dying. We just launched our settler colonialism. And then we will also have one for white supremacy. So you can see that there is a rhythm. And then if you want to learn more about death and dying, please, we invite you to check out our Unexamined Me podcast, as well as the blog where we are also writing and talking about different aspects of death and dying. And lastly, we have our upcoming Reclaiming Leadership Framework. It's a 4-week course in January in which we will cover 2 of the 4 domains of the Reclaiming Leadership Framework, which is the remember and reclaim domains. So if you want to learn more, please, again, graftedroots.net. Y'all, there's so much happening over there. So with that, we thank you so much. We're going to actually stop recording here so that those that are within the webinar, if they have questions, we are able to have that conversation. And we invite you, if you're like, well, wait a second, I have questions. We invite you to come on over to Grafted Roots. Drop it in the discussion on the podcast, and we can have a conversation there. And then don't miss your opportunity to be here live next month. All right, thank you so much.